Have you ever been to a Raptors game? Or perhaps you've just seen it on TV, such as myself. But you can appreciate how tall these basketball players are. My goodness, some of them are 7 feet and some are over 7 feet tall. And I just can't imagine. I'm short, I'm a short woman, and really, for me, anyone over 6'5" kind of looks like a giant to me. But I can't imagine being beside someone that is 7 feet tall. But what do you think about someone that's 10 feet tall? That is pretty overwhelming. I want to talk to you about giants. And my message today is called Giants Amongst Us. Now, we think of giants as individuals, living individuals that are extremely tall, extremely large in body stature, and sometimes extremely loud and angry. When we were children, we've all heard and read or had read to us the book of Jack and the Beanstalk. And we know how the story goes, that Jack plants these beans, and when he woke up the next morning, this very strong but very tall beanstalk had developed through the night, and Jack decided to climb it. And when he did and got to the top, we discover as the readers there was a giant up there. And that giant did not like Jack. And so he was very large, he was very boisterous, and he yelled a lot. His voice was the kind of voice that would shake anybody that's hearing him, causing them to shake in their boots, as Jack did. And Jack really had to struggle in many ways to get away from him so that he could chop down the beanstalk. That's one giant. Another giant that we can be reminded of as children is Gulliver's Travels. It's quite interesting how the author has depicted Gulliver, because in the first voyage that he took, he ended up on an island of tiny people. And so Gulliver himself was the giant. On the second voyage that he took, he ended up on another island, and those people were the giants, and Gulliver was the small person. And so he was somewhat at their mercy. So we're finding all kinds of examples with giants. And then, of course, we remember the account in the Bible of David and Goliath. Now, that is a very famous story. I'm sure if you're familiar at all with the Bible stories, you will have read the account of David and Goliath. And we know that Goliath was a very huge giant. It's reported that he was over 10 feet tall. There's been some reports that say he was over 10 feet tall, but nonetheless, 10 feet tall is pretty large. And not only was he tall in stature, he was tall, he was large in his body form. And then on top of that, with all his armor and his spear, he looked pretty, what could we say, pretty disarming, pretty frightening, especially for a young lad like David, who was 13 years old and not very tall, probably not much weight on his body, for he was a shepherd boy, and he didn't eat a lot of things that would put weight on him. And so here we have this very large giant, this very small boy, if we could call David a boy at 13, that took on the giant, and he won. So those are 3 examples of physical giants. But there are also other kinds of giants, and they're not so much physical as they are spiritual. And we face them every day. Sometimes we face them with much integrity and much strength and much positivity. And other days we don't face them very well. So I want to talk about these giants and how they affect us and how we can affect them. Yes, we have a weapon that we can use to defeat these giants, and we don't have to face them alone. For the scripture tells us that Christ is with us, that any battles that we face, we do not face alone, and that we don't fight flesh and blood, but we fight strongholds and principalities that rise up against us to bring us down. And so I want to go over with you some things that we can do to effectively deal with these giants. We don't have to put up with how they chastise us. That seems to be a character of a giant. They are very much bullies. Their main attack mode is to first de-escalate us, to make us feel very insecure, and to try to make us come to the realization that we might as well give up because we are no match for a giant. So what do I mean by all of this? Well, as I said, giants are bullies, and we know that bullies are very much ones that are in your face, and they tell you all what they're going to do to you. And so that puts fear in the person listening to these ridiculous threats. And so even the giants that are spiritual in nature, they're nonetheless a bully too. And they also will make us believe that we cannot and we are inadequate to face them, to challenge them, and to take them down. But I'm here to tell you that that isn't the case. We only lose the battle when we decide to give up. And we don't have to give up because we have someone fighting our battles for us. I have a book that's written by Max Lucado, a very great author. And his book is called Facing the Giants. And this one particular chapter that I have, it's called Take Goliath Down. And so he says, you know what David knew, and you do what David did. You pick up 5 stones and you make 5 decisions. Ever wonder why David took 5 stones into battle? Why not 2? Or why not 22? Rereading his story reveals 5 answers. Use your fingers to remind you of the 5 stones you need to face down Goliath. Let your thumb remind you of the stone of the past. Oh my, how this giant loves to get at us with our past. So we have to remember that the past is in the past, and that we do not have to think or have it thrown up at us about anything in our past that we have done that we may have wished we had the opportunity to redo over again, because we don't have that opportunity. We can't redo what's already been done. But with God and walking with Him, all things are forgiven, because He tells us He takes those things, those sins that we may have committed, and He throws them into the sea of forgetfulness. And so who are we to allow this giant of the past to hash up things that God has already dealt with? Then we come, so we have the stone of the past, and now we have the stone of prayer. Never underestimate the stone of prayer. Note the valley between your thumb and finger. To pass from one to the next, you must go through the valley. Let it remind you of David's descent. Before going high, David had to go low. David went low before ascending to fight. David descended to prepare. Don't face your giant without first doing the same. Dedicate time to prayer. Paul, the Apostle Paul, wrote, prayer is essential in this ongoing warfare. Pray hard and long. So we must never underestimate the power of prayer. Don't give up before you have the opportunity to pray. And certainly don't go into a battle with a giant before you've had time to pray. So the third stone is the stone of priority. See your struggle as God's canvas. On it, He will paint His multicolored supremacy, meaning that He will be supreme over this giant that is harassing you, especially if you turn to Him before you go into battle. Let your tallest finger, this one here, remind you of your highest priority, God's reputation. David jealously guarded it. No one, absolutely no one, was going to defame his Lord. David fought so that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. Fourthly, the stone of passion. I've got to get my fingers here. So the stone of passion. David lobotomized the giant because he emphasized the Lord. We know in the story that David had cut off Goliath's head. So it says, as Goliath moved closer to attack, David ran out to meet him. Now imagine, here you are facing this giant who is way larger, way taller than what you are. And he's coming towards you, and you're not retreating. No, you're like David. You are running, not walking. You're running towards your Goliath. You're taking control of the situation. So David, reaching into his shepherd's bag and taking out a stone, he hurled it from his sling and hit the Philistine in the forehead. The stone sank in, and Goliath stumbled and fell face downward to the ground. David ran not away from, but toward the giant. On one side of the battlefield, Saul and his cowardly army gulped. On the other, Goliath and his skull splitters scoffed. So we're seeing how a battle can be won, and we just remember our fingers. So the fifth, which is this little guy here, trying to do it without moving all the other fingers, it's the stone of persistence. David didn't think one rock would do. He knew Goliath had 4 behemoth relatives. So there was a giant there with 6 fingers on his hand and 6 toes on his feet. 24 fingers and toes. He was another of those descended from Rapha. These 4 were descended from Rapha in Gath. So David did not retreat. He ran towards the giant. So imitate David. When you're facing a giant, imitate David. Never give up. Irregardless how things look, never give up. One prayer may not be enough. One apology may not do it. One day or month of resolve might not suffice. You may get knocked down a time or two, but don't quit. Keep loading the rocks. Keep swinging the sling. David took 5 stones. He made 5 decisions. Do likewise. Past, prayer, priority, passion, and persistence. Next time Goliath wakes you up, reach for a stone. Odds are he'll be out of the room before you can load your sling. Very good advice, I might state. I have a couple sayings that I want to give to you. And one is, first thought of the morning, last worry of the night. Your Goliath dominates your day and infiltrates your joy. Have you ever noticed that when you go to bed and you are resting quietly and looking forward to a very good night's sleep, and all of a sudden you're stirred and you wake up and you have these thoughts of worry, perhaps of fear, maybe anxiety, that seem to be pounding at you and they're just not letting go. Well, that's when you take up your 5 stones and you start hurling them at these giants of the night. The next saying I want to leave with you is that giants, we must face them, yet we need not face them alone. Earlier on in the message, I told you that when we fight a battle, we never fight it alone. That if we have God on our side, that's all we need. He is the giant killer, and he is the battle winner. So remember to pray. Pray before you ever try to tackle a giant in your life. That giant of fear, perhaps. It can overtake us in no time at all. So we have to be quick in mind to remember to pray and ask God to be with us and help us as we sling the stone of defeat at that giant, that God will take that stone and hurl it as hard as he can to defeat it. So we have many giants that we face and we may not even be aware of, and we need to realize that when we're just feeling uneasy or we're feeling defeated, these are all giants, and they have no hold over us when we know Christ. So remember the story of David and Goliath. Remember the story of Jack and the Beanstalk. Jack was the victor. David was the victor. And even in Gulliver's Travels, Gulliver was the victor. And so I leave this with you today, that you don't have to fight your battles alone, that you can be victorious. Because if you remember that Christ died on the cross for you, that you could be victorious in him. And so I pray that there will be no giants in your life, and if there is, you already have a battle plan to come against them. And don't withdraw from your battle plan, and don't walk away from it. Keep it going. Keep that prayer going, and your reinforcements will be by your side, and they will defeat the enemy for you. You just need to be faithful. Thank you, and God bless.